I'm Juan Francisco, and I'm a psychic medium. I'm here with you to explore your intuition, the supernatural, and self empowerment. This is Third Eyesight. Wil Fisher, also known as Sylvia Will Gather Rainbow, is a life coach, spiritual healer, and drag queen who loves getting super woo and chatting with fascinating folks about all things spiritually queer and queerly spiritual. Will's mission is to support LGBTQ men on their journeys towards self love, authenticity, and profound fulfillment. Will is also the host of the podcast Queerly Beloved, where they have playful and profound interviews of LGBTQIA plus guests working in the field of spirituality and personal growth. I was honored to be on Queerly Beloved a few months ago and had such a wonderful time with Will and gave him a mediumship reading. And so now Will is on Third Eyesight. Will, thanks for hopping onto Third Eyesight. Good to see you.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Great to see you too.
Yeah, and I'm so excited, especially after we had a conversation on your podcast, Queerly Beloved, which we'll get into in this conversation. But tell folks where you're based and about the work you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm based in Encinitas, which is in San Diego. I live a couple blocks away from the ocean. It's a really groovy, kind of high vibe part of California. And the work that I do, so I am a life coach, a spiritual life coach, an executive coach, and also a retreat host, and then a podcast host as well. So I do life coaching work primarily for LGBTQ men, but I offer my work to all people, but that's the main demographic I serve. And then I also do one-on-one retreats where people come and spend a night or two in my space, and we do a deep dive, deep healing work and transformational work. And then I also host group retreats for LGBTQ men, a retreat called Awakened Hearts.
That's all amazing. I didn't know that you. I of course I know about the group retreats you've done, but the one-on-ones, I'll definitely have to ask you more about that in this conversation. That sounds fascinating. When did you start doing the one-on-ones, and how does it feel? I'll go ahead and ask you now. How does it
Yeah.
feel to have those retreats? I assume you mean your home space, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, what has been the experience to have it in your home space, which I'm sure is a very intimate part of your life?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I started opening my home up to private one-on-one clients where I'd meet with folks who happen to live closer by. A lot of my clients are on the East Coast, but for those who live closer to me, I started thinking, oh yeah, why not have some in-person sessions? And then I started also offering these like 3-hour sessions. And I was noticing that clients were getting so much out of like a 3-hour session that then it started me thinking of what it would be like to host some kind of intensive experience. And my place is set up to be really Zen-like. I transformed my backyard recently so that it's just very calming, relaxing, peaceful. And so it's been really helpful to have the opportunity to go deep over a longer extended period of time where people can really sink into their trust and safety with me, and their nervous system can feel really regulated, and so they can allow themselves to go deeper into the work that we're doing. And each one is different, based on what the client's needing, what the client's ready for. But I'd say I've witnessed some of the most miraculous changes in my clients from those events, because it's like a deep dive in a quick, effective way. So it's like they're getting a lot in a short amount of time. So it's been really beautiful to see how it's impacted people. And then you were asking about them coming to my personal space. Yeah, that doesn't feel it doesn't feel any sort of way for me. I think partly because I used to live and run a queer retreat center in upstate New York, right? So I was already living in a retreat center and used to, 60, 90 strangers coming into my house, right? In air quotes. And so now hosting one person over a couple nights is totally normal, and feels really good for me. It feels like a way for me to be of service, not just in the work that I'm offering, but in welcoming people into my space.
Yeah, that's such an act of love, like welcoming someone into
Mm.
your home space. And I'm sure for some or many of your clients that there's something very grounding about entering someone's home space and that being the classroom, so to speak, or the space where the work is done. Well, turning it over to your personal experience, in the interest of like what we talk about on this podcast about personal spiritual experiences, what was your first spiritual awakening like, or is there a spiritual awakening experience you've had that has really stood out to you in your journey so far?
Yeah, sure. I'd say that I've had many. So like a few are coming to mind immediately. Going back to Easton Mountain, which is a LGBTQ retreat center in upstate New York. The first time I was there, I got offered to take part in a tantric workshop, and that was like a 4-day retreat where we were using these tantric practices to connect with the divine. And that was one of the moments where I felt the energy of spirit move through my body in a way that was undeniable, where I was having visuals, even though I wasn't under any kind of influence, where I was essentially channeling in a way that I didn't know was possible by just opening up this portal and allowing spirit to move through me. So that's one that came to mind immediately, maybe just because we were already talking about Easton. Previous to that, I'd say just the first time that I started learning about personal growth and spirituality, and one of my entry points was the Landmark Forum, which happened in New York City. It's kind of like personal growth McDonald's. It's like fast food personal growth. Like you do it for a weekend and like tons of people are there and it's like in and out, but you get all these major downloads, all these major concepts, and then you're left with this realization that I create my reality, with this realization that I get to have the life that I want. I get to choose what I want to experience in this life in a more empowered way. And, after that weekend, I quit my job like the next day because I realized that there was no need for me to be doing that if I wanted something else. So that was big. I'd say my first time sitting with ayahuasca was definitely a spiritual awakening for me, where I was simply able to view myself, my consciousness in a way that was so unique to the experience being with that medicine. It was so different than how I'd ever thought of my consciousness. It was like I was able to observe it in this really unique way. Um, and then another major one for me was going to a radical fairy gathering for the first time. For me, that was Beltane at Short Mountain in Tennessee. And it was a moment where I got to see expressions, like self-expression, in a way that was so embodying of freedom and joy and celebrating the unique spirit of human expression. That was definitely a spiritual experience. Yeah, so there's lots. I mean, I could go on and on, but yeah, I feel like I do feel like there are people who have like that one spiritual awakening moment, that like big one. And for me, it's been a series of them throughout my life, and they continue to happen.
Yeah, and that is extremely valid, and also I just love how all the different experiences you have had, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. That they it just shows that spiritual awakenings and those realization moments come in different shapes and forms, different kinds of experiences, not just one way. Like the clouds open up, it comes
Yeah.
in many different ways. Now I've heard you talk about the radical fairies on your podcast. Could you share with folks who may not know what that is? Share what the radical fairies are.
Yeah, and just for your information, Juan, there's a gatherette coming in Brooklyn this summer. It's going to be one of the first times they've done that kind of thing in Brooklyn. But usually these gatherings that are hosted by the Radical Fairies happen in more natural settings. So there's a sanctuary in Vermont, there's one in Oregon. They are sanctuaries, they're big pieces of land that the fairies have have come to own, and they'll host these gatherings usually around pagan holidays like Beltane or Lammas, and the fairies originally came in response to the gay rights movement, where folks, Harry Hay and others, were realizing that to get equal rights wasn't necessarily the ideal end goal. Like, do we actually want to have the right to marry when so many hetero marriages are failing? Do we actually want to be part of the military complex when that involves killing people? Like, what if we, instead of just trying to have equal rights, why don't we start thinking about what our unique queer gifts are and create spaces for us to explore new ways of being that are outside of the heteronormative path. And so the sanctuaries were places where queer people specifically could go away from society and away from that default way of interacting with each other and experiment with and try on new ways of being together. So being with each other in a more subject conscious way where you're really seeing the deep humanity in each other, being together in really heart-centered ways, being together in a way where money isn't such a factor, right? So there's usually like a no one turned away for lack of funds policy. Being together in a way that creative self-expression is celebrated, that judgment is left at the door, and instead we get to celebrate each other's unique expression of self.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I'll have to definitely. You said they're gathering in Brooklyn soon? Is that what you
Yeah, there's
said?
one coming up in Brooklyn this summer. I'll send you the deets. And then I'm coming out to Vermont for one at the end of the summer, end of July. And that one is particularly cool because we put on a play. So we're out in the woods, we're camping. There's a main place where the meals are. But then during that week, we're putting on a full-on production with costumes, with sets, with songs, with choreography, and we'll perform it on top of the mountain to all the fairies, and it's just it's theater magic is what it is.
Wow, wow. And I also want to ask you about another experience that you mentioned while doing ayahuasca. Could you share with folks listening what was the setting? Like, how did you find like what was the context of you having that experience? Because I've never done ayahuasca or plant medicine, but I'm always interested in what how people find the means and the settings or the right professionals to do it with. What yeah, what went
Yeah.
into doing that for you?
Yeah, so my my perspective is that for me, the path was very organic. It was a very patient path. You know, I heard about ayahuasca and I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. But I didn't, I kind of like curbed my instinct to like go and like Google it and book something and just, jump on it. Instead, I just stayed open and curious and open and curious and and hopeful that if it was meant to be, that it would happen in a really divine way. And sure enough, I ended up working with this man who ended up serving combo, which is another plant medicine but non-psychoactive, and he ended up being part of this ayahuasca community, which he had sat with many, many communities, but he said, this is the one that I would most highly recommend. And eventually there was a weekend where he was supposed to sit and couldn't make it, and he gave me his spot. And honestly, like when he gave it to me, I still didn't quite understand what I was doing until I got the call from the person who was going to be leading it. It was like a series of synchronicities that led me to my seat at that circle. And for me, do allowing the medicine to almost come to me rather than like just approaching it, in a more like consumerist way, what was helpful for me. And then on the flip side of that, also just being really mindful of the people that you're sitting with. Are they going to be serving it in a good way? Are they going to be honoring the traditions that it came from? Are they trained by a lineage that is respectful and honorable? Those are things that one can be mindful of too. And it's helpful to know someone who may have sat with that community to have a strong referral, which I did. And in all of that, it also just allowed me to feel safe and regulated when I was in the medicine because the medicine is very powerful and has major major effects. And so to feel held and safe and know that you are with a group that is has integrity is very helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of intention went into it, and that's, I mean, it's more important than anything and anything
Mhm.
we do, right?
Mhm.
And speaking about, there were some aspects of your journey and your experiences where you did tap into some ties to like breaking out of self-limiting beliefs. And I wanted to ask you something that you have on your website. There's a statement that you have for your clients to read, and it says, quote, "You're sick of the inner critic whispering you're not enough, not worthy, not lovable." And you're ready to replace it with self-loving beliefs and empowering self-talk. So I would love to ask you, without sacrificing client confidentiality, like what are the most mentioned self-limiting beliefs you hear from clients? And what usually, like, how do you work through with clients to overcome those self-limiting beliefs that you often hear?
Yeah, so you can hear in what you just read some of the self-limiting beliefs, this idea of not being worthy, not being lovable. Those are the deeper root level limiting beliefs. Now, I wouldn't necessarily hear that from my client, right? A client's not going to like come to me and be like, "Hey, I'm not worthy of love," or I'm not inherently valuable," or whatever it is. Those are deeper layers. So what I would hear more often would be something like, I really want a boyfriend, but in order to get one, I have to like lose 40 pounds or something. So usually the way that I would hear that is I have to change something external about myself in order to get what I actually desire, right? And so then helping the client see that underneath that there may be these deep buried thoughts around not feeling fully lovable, not feeling fully worthy of love, of attention, of respect, of abundance. And so the process is often digging up those deeper limiting beliefs that are presenting in a more light, external, socially acceptable way, um, and then finding ways to release them. And there's one piece is simply the self-awareness that, oh, I've had this story that I need to do this in order to get this, and actually I am whole and complete right now. I can still work on myself and still improve these things that I'm hoping to improve, but I am fully worthy of love and abundance and all the best things in life right now as I am. And I can move forward in that way. So to start to understand that logically and consciously, but then the deeper work is also releasing it from the subconscious. And so I use a number of approaches and practices to do that, including neurolinguistic programming, timeline therapy, hypnotherapy, and ritual work, somatic work, energetic and emotional release work.
Do you have an example of, or do you have like a favorite experience with a client where they've done the work and like what are I guess I'll ask in this way, what are some of the results you've seen from clients and when they've broken through that barrier? Because I think this is such also a human experience. And I'll just side note very quickly. It's interesting that the way you put it of the socially acceptable way to say these self-limiting beliefs, it comes out through like I need to lose weight to get a boyfriend instead of saying, I'm not lovable. I
Mhm.
think that in of itself, the fact that we have to censor ourselves or like say it in a different way says a lot about how much we limit ourselves and how we express what we really need to say. So when
Mhm.
folks of have when clients have broken through that, what are some of the experiences you've seen clients go through or the things they've been able to achieve for themselves?
Yeah, sure. And I'd say that a lot of times it's not even that folks are self-censoring, but it's that they aren't aware that that's the deeper belief, that's the deeper root cause. And so it can be really uncomfortable to look at that, to say like, and it is typically a part of them that believes that they are unlovable. It's not that all of them believes that they're unlovable, and ultimately their highest self knows that the truth is that they are inherently lovable, that they are the most lovable, that they are an embodiment of lovability simply by being alive, right? So helping them come back to that truth, and helping in so doing, helping them to love themselves again and to really, really care deeply for themselves. Yeah, we were talking about the personal one-on-one retreats earlier. And so the example that comes to mind is a client who had been single for many, many years and was feeling just very, very lonely and feeling very frustrated with his dating experience and feeling like just one after the next things would not work out. And then he came and we did a major breakthrough experience, weekend experience, and he left feeling a different experience of himself. Like he experienced himself differently. Like he was able to see himself differently in a new light and see how incredible he is, how lovable he is, how accomplished he is, all the things that I was able to see that he was not able to until he left. And he found a boyfriend in less than a month later, and he's still with him. And it was like he wasn't doing anything differently than he was before we did our work together. It wasn't like, sometimes some coaching is about actions, and yeah, certainly I work with my clients to help them be more strategic in their actions and be in action, right? But in this example and in many examples, it's more of the energetic shift that suddenly makes it possible. So it was like once that shifted in his energy and he started occurring differently for himself and for others, the love just appeared, and it was really beautiful, and it's been really cool seeing them post on Facebook and stuff, and he, immediately let me know like this happened because of our work, and I wouldn't take full credit, of course, but to know that there's like something tangible on the other side of this is really cool.
That's amazing, and it's like you've helped him see that he can have this solid launching pad, right, from which to
Mhm.
yeah to embark on this journey. And I hear what you're saying. It's not about getting the full credit for it, but I mean, there is credit due towards your direction here in terms of like how you've been able to, like, you showed this client what was possible. I mean, it was up
Mhm.
to them to seek it, right, and to go on this
Mhm.
journey with you. But
Yeah.
that's incredible. What
Yeah.
is what's one misconception or idea that folks may have about life coaching that if you could debunk
Mhm.
it or just address it, like what's something you often hear as a misconception about this work?
Yeah, I think one of the tricky things about life coaching is that you don't have to be licensed, right? So there's a lot of like self-proclaimed life coaches who might actually simply be really good at giving people advice. Or maybe they're not even good at it, right? And life coaching is not about giving advice. In my experience, life coaching is really about treating the client as whole and complete and resourceful and helping them to come into that understanding and embodiment. But to do that not by just speaking at them or telling them what to do, but by being curious and open and going on a journey of exploration with them, and then using tools and techniques to help get rid of what's getting in the way of that. And so there are people who are self-proclaimed life coaches who give the industry a bad reputation for it not being very serious. For me, I care about credentials. I don't think that you have to have credentials in order to be an effective life coach, but I think it's helpful. And so I've invested in a ton of training. My credential is the highest level credential you can get as a life coach. It's MCC, Master Certified, which requires like major testing and it requires 5,000 paid hours. And I also have been trained up in lots of different modalities, like like I've mentioned, hypnotherapy and timeline therapy and neurolinguistic and Reiki. And so I believe that to be the most effective life coach, it is important to put in the work, and to be constantly putting in work on one's own self. So I guess coming back to the misperception, I think it's that it's a profession that's easy to do, that anyone can do. Anyone can just say they are a life coach and make a ton of money doing it.
That I have definitely read up on that. And I've gotten to know some really fabulous people, including yourself in the recent past few months who do this work. And I mean, there's obviously so much. There's so much that folks can get out of seeing someone like you.
Mm,
And I do want to ask you. You've mentioned that the main audience for your work, although not exclusively that audience, is a queer audience. And I would love to ask you, how do you feel your own experience as a queer person informs? I mean, I think this may be an obvious question to answer, but I would love to hear, like, unique to you, how your experience as a queer person informs your work with queer people, and what do you draw from your own experience?
mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of queer folks have challenges around authenticity and around finding a path that feels truly connected to their heart's desire. There's a tricky thing that happens to a lot of queer folks where they may have put on a persona as kids when they were still in the closet that was able to receive a lot of acknowledgement and create success on a certain level, and that kept them safe. And that what happens for some queer folks is that they come out of the closet and then they're still seeking this validation that's not actually authentic validation, where they're not really being deeply seen and acknowledged for who they are. And so that's why I think you see a lot of gay men in particular fall into traps of perfectionism, of overachieving, of material obsession, of needing to have the perfect body and the perfect boyfriend in order to be perceived a certain way. And so for me, I have also had that journey of needing to see where I am holding on to old patterns that came as a result of me trying my best to be safe in a world that felt unsafe to me with this secret. So getting rid of my people-pleasing tendencies, my perfectionism, and it's still a work in progress, but because I have that experience, I'm able to see it in the queer folks that I work with and have a certain level of empathy and compassion and understanding, but also to be able to help them start to see it and start to transform it and alchemize it in a good way.
Speaking so much truth to power. Yes, I personally resonate with so much that you said, and it's such a unique. I keep using the word unique, but it really is a unique experience as a queer person to, from such an early age, to feel like we have to put on this mask, which is
Mhm.
what receives the praise and receives the validation, right?
Mhm.
And do you feel that there is a I think, to preface my question, there's historically and so often a divide between queerness and spirituality. And then we're going to get to your podcast in a bit because that'll be a good segue. Um, in your experience, what has been your experience finding community as a spiritual queer person?
Well, I mentioned the radical fairies, so that was huge for me. And then Easton Mountain also is a community, a spiritual community. And yeah, I'd say, going back to the fairies, I felt that when I came out as a gay man, that it meant that I needed to let go of spirituality, because spirituality to me, I was equating it with religion. And my understanding was that most religious institutions considered homosexuality a sin. And so I wanted nothing to do with it. And so it was almost like I felt like spirituality and spirituality meant religion, and gay and religion did not go hand in hand. And so I had to let go of all of it, right? And so when I did discover the radical fairies, who many of the fairies, I wouldn't say all because there's kind of an anti-conformist energy around the fairies. So we can't say that all of them are one way or another because it's all about unique expression of self. But there are a lot of fairies who really love some of the more pagan, some of the more woo-woo beliefs. And so there's a lot of ritual work. And when I was able to see that and start to see queer people experiencing spirituality in a way that resonated with me, that really called me back into my spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices and helped me learn ways of being with spirit that resonated with me and felt really juicy for me. I'm part Native American, and so earth-based spirituality is really powerful for me. And so a lot of the fairy stuff was already very earth-based, calling the directions, like praying and honoring these different pagan holidays. So yeah, and then doing that with community, with other queer community, just feels like a validation of this idea that queerness and spirituality go hand in hand. And in some ways it's honoring our queer ancestors who have held sacred roles in communities, sacred spiritual roles in communities for millennia. And so I do think that when we queer people gather and practice spirituality, that we are opening portals for the ancestors who held those sacred roles.
So beautifully said. And I think that is a perfect segue into my next question. I'm such a fan of Queerly Beloved, and no, not just because you graciously had me on the podcast. I do listen to it religiously. Every time there's a new episode, I love it so much. And it feels like the kind of podcast I've been looking for as a queer person. So if we think back to when you first had the idea to create this podcast, what inspired that idea?
Hmm. Well, thank you for saying that. That really warms my heart and it inspires me to keep it going. You know, as you know, podcasts are a labor of love, but it's really helpful to get that feedback. And yeah, I just love knowing that. Thank you. And yeah, it's funny. When I was at Easton Mountain, when I was serving as the executive director, I had a inspired idea to create a YouTube series called Tub Talk because what was happening was we had this hot tub and I would sit in this hot tub with different teachers and gurus and spiritual leaders who were coming through to teach workshops and lead retreats at the retreat center. And so I'd have these like deep conversations with them about their ideas around spirit and queerness and all that good stuff. And so then at one point I was like, we should record these. And then I had this silly idea to make this little series called Tub Talk where they would film me and the person sitting with me and we would talk about spiritual things. You know, it might be tantra or meditation or whatever. And it was also a way to promote upcoming retreats. So it was really fun. And then I fast forward, I left Easton Mountain. I moved here to the West Coast. I've got my practice going, my life coaching practice, and I started getting really into podcasts, listening to them, and I was really into the spiritual ones, especially. So I was super into the Sacred Sons podcast, and I was into Alice and Charles's podcast, and I just realized that I love these topics, and why don't I bring the idea of having conversations about spirituality and queerness back that I was doing with the YouTube series and do it in the form of a podcast.
So first of all, is Tub Talk still up somewhere? Because that sounds delightful.
Yeah, yeah. Let me look it up. Let me see. Yeah, it was super fun.
I will definitely start. That sounds like so much fun.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, something I noticed about something I think is really special about Clearly Beloved is that there are so many there's a diversity of voices speaking on the podcast. I think that makes it even more special in addition to what you put into it and the work you put into it. And I can tell it's a labor of love and I can tell it's resonating with so many folks as including myself. Um So before we wrap up, where can listeners find out more about you? Where can they reach out to you? All the things.
Yeah, well, I'd love them to check out Queerly Beloved, which is available on all places where you listen to podcasts. And then my Instagram is fairly active, which is WILFISH99, so WilFish99. And then my website, WIL-fullyliving.com, willfullyliving.com. And yeah, I love hearing from folks. I love connecting with folks. And certainly, I also welcome folks who might be interested in some of the group retreat stuff. There's a lot of queer men who feel really isolated and feel like they might have some friends, but they don't get a lot of opportunities to feel deeply connected to other GBTQ men. And so those retreats are great ways for them to start to access that heart-centered connection to other queer men.
Wonderful. And am I speaking too fast when I say or guess that you have a retreat they usually do in December? Is that wrong?
Yeah, there's one
Okay.
coming up at Easton Mountain. Yeah, on the East Coast. Yeah, I'm hosting one this summer in San Diego on Labor Day, and then my next one will be in Easton Mountain. Yeah,
Awesome. And
thank you.
folks can find that on your website?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to make sure we plug that. I remember you mentioned that to me once. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
Will, thank you so much for conversing with me, and it's been lovely to
Yeah.
talk to you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Oh, the other thing I wanted to share with you is that episode, and maybe I already shared this with you, but I'll share it again. That episode where you did my reading, my cousin ended up confirming a lot of the things that I was kind of unaware of. And yeah, it was just so beautiful to get to receive that from you. And now what's so fun is that it's like recorded, so I can go back and listen to it and be like, oh yeah, remember when Grandpa was sending that message? And yeah, it was such a delightful, valuable, beautiful experience. So thank you for that, and thank you for this chance to drop in with you again today.
It was an honor to do that for you, and I was so honored that you asked me to not only talk to chat with you, but also do that reading for you. And I so much what you said about your work. I think we're very humble people. Like it's spirit doing the work, but we are the channels. Whether it's life coaching and helping someone to see the possibilities, or we're channeling spirit. Like we are deciding to be that conduit. So I'm just honored to have been that for you. So thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate you,
thank
Will.
you too, Juan. Thank you.
Follow the podcast and please leave a review. If you want me to talk about a specific subject on the podcast or you have a question for the podcast, go to juanfranciscospirit.com and go to my contact page and submit that question.